which is just brilliant. So, yeah, I know, isn't that great? No, I don't think we'll have any insect-based food, but we'll see. We'll see. So again, December 3rd should be a lot of fun. Thanks.
Right. All right, sure. I'm good. How are we going to advance slides? Have you got them? They got it, but it's on the other side.
Are you on the other screen?
Yeah.
No, I saw it there. I saw the cursor. It showed up. There it is.
I know. Good.
Yeah, or minimize it. You can just minimize it.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, good to see my friend.
I'd like to say that I'm glad our only TPWD person here tonight is Sam. Why? Because if Tanya was here, I'd have the state ornithologist in the audience, and that wasn't going to work. We go back to the initial slide, we're ready to show that. All right, well, to begin with.
There they are.
All right. Okay, great, thank you, Frank. All right. Now to advance slides. Okay. Right there. Okay, that button right there, or this button? Got it. All right. Ooh. Romantic lighting. Okay, that's slide number 2. So, all right. First of all wrens are skulkers. Oh, okay. All right, if I go that way. All right, hey, we're in business. All right. In general, wrens are resident rather than migratory birds. There are a few migratory species. Those are the ones that live in places where they have harsh winters, and wrens aren't stupid, they leave. Pretty much though, they stay hidden in the understory until one of them starts to sing. Then wrens are amongst the loudest birds for their size, often being able to be heard for over 200 meters. The songs don't quite have the wide variation of a chickadee or a crow, so they can become familiar sounds from the understory. It doesn't take long to learn a basic wren repertory, particularly for the two that live here, the Carolina wren and the Bewick's wren. We'll look at those in a little more detail in a while. They're also known for their scolding calls. That's what the lovely Deborah sees. That's what the lovely Deborah hears. That's my wife, the lovely Deborah. She's always going, "That's a wren, isn't it?" And I go, "Yes." She's also the one who coined the term perky butt bird. She described it. So pretty much they're adapted to any habitat that has small insects for them to eat. And we'll look at a couple of extremes before we're done. They also tend to be solitary, at least by pair, rather than engage in cooperative breeding. There are a few species in South and Central America that do engage in cooperative breeding, but the ones we see are pretty much solitary birds and can be very, very, very territorial, both the male and the female, when it comes to defending their home ground. Okay. Yay, it works. Okay. In the family Troglodytiae, worked on that for a while, Troglodytiae. The name comes from troglodyte, which is Greek for cave dweller, and it's from the tendency of most species to forage into dark crevices, and most of them, not just many, but most are cavity nesters, or at least they almost build a cavity nest as they go. Of the 86 known recognized species, 85 live in the New World and 1 lives in the Old World. All right, I have to move my notes, hang on. All right, we'll start with that 1. I went the wrong way. There we are. All right, you can barely see that quote at the top, or I apologize for that. It is exceptionally long-winded. It comes from a book called The Gentleman's Recreation in 4 parts, viz. Hunting, hawking, fowling, fishing, wherein these generous exercises are largely treated of, and the terms of art for hunting and hawking are more amply enlarged than heretofore, wheretofore is prefixed a large sculpture, giving easy directions for blowing the horn and other sculptures inserted proper to each recreation, with an abstract at the end of each subject of such laws that relate to same. That is the title of the book. It's, like I said, Nicholas Cox, 1686, and I tripped over this when I was doing the research for this paper presentation, and I discovered that this book, The Gentleman's Recreation, is actually an important landmark in English literature. It's the first time anybody wrote all this stuff down. So it's very strange, but this is the Eurasian wren, the one species that lives on the other side of the pond. Until recently, they were considered conspecific with the North American winter and Pacific wrens, and recently as 2009. The degree of differentiation between the taxa is still being studied and clarified, as the forms are indistinguishable except by song, which is also true. But people like my daughter, who's a geneticist, are busy figuring all these things out. So as to when and where that one North American species, probably a Pacific wren, snuck across the Bering Land Bridge, it's still an open question, but it's sometime in the last million years based on variations in DNA. So, and recent DNA work on the Eurasian species indicates it consists of 4 distinct clades. One in Europe, which you can see rearranged here. You can see one here, one in the Caucasus, one in Nepal and the Himalayas, and then another much larger one in Eastern Asia. Those are probably on their way to becoming separate species, but as of right now, they are still considered a single species. And just in general, they're an example of what's called, where is the term? Cryptic speciation, or a species complex. Either term would be correct. And basically, that's a group of animals that are a biological species, but they've started to separate out a little bit, enough that you can tell a difference in some aspects of their lives, either behavioral or genetic, but not morphological. So another example of this is, anybody heard of fringe-toed lizards? There's like 11 fringe-toed lizards that live in the mountains around the Central Valley in California. They're all exactly identical, but they don't interbreed with one another for one reason or another, and genetically they are separate species. Surprisingly, so are African elephants. And this was something else I discovered while I was doing this talk, is that there are 2 species of African elephants. There's a savanna and a forest. They live in different habitats. They have completely different foraging, feeding, etc. But they're virtually identical. They just don't interbreed because they never cross paths with each other. So every time you see an African elephant, you have to ask, is that a savanna African elephant or a forest African elephant? Because there is a difference. One a little closer to home, everybody knows what a leopard frog looks like. There are 22 different species of leopard frogs. And the only way you can tell them apart is by their calls, and sometimes by their behavior. But they live all over North America. All right. Moving on to the next one. Come on, do your thing. Right. Okay, let's try that.
Nope.
Nope, we're frozen. I talked too long. Okay, what are we gonna do? Oh, it did something. Oh, good. All right. That winter wren is not supposed to be in the middle of the screen just yet. But this is just to make the point. If you look at those two birds, morphologically, they're almost completely identical, and yet there are two different species. Oh, there we go. All right. Yeah, these are my examples of extremophiles in the wren world. There are about 30 subspecies of the Eurasian wren. Some live in jungles, some in mountaintops, and some in the cold deserts of southern Tibet. But the real champions of survival in the subspecies are the ones that live in the Outer Hebrides and the Shetland and Faroe Islands. If you've ever been there, this is the middle of nowhere. There's the Hebrides, the Outer Hebrides. That's St. Kilda, which actually has its own subspecies of wren. This little guy over here. And also has Neolithic structures on it, about the same age as Stonehenge. People lived out there 4,000 years ago. How did they find that? I don't know. But anyway, there are 4 different. The other map, the one in the corner, if you're a Scotch drinker, you recognize that. I put that in there because I'm a Scotch drinker. All right. So, as I said, there are 4 different subspecies out here, actually 5, no, 4 different subspecies. 5 different subspecies, pardon me. And most of them, all of them are slightly heavier, with slightly shorter wings and slightly shorter legs than their cousins on the mainland. That's Bergman's rule. The lousier the place you live, the shorter your limbs and the chunkier your body. And this is a lovely part of the world. I looked this up. The average temperature at the Faroe Islands, the average temperature is around 45 degrees year-round, taken during the year. There are maybe 50 sunny days a year, and the wind never stops blowing. This is not a great place if you're a bird that weighs less than a dime and lives on small insects. So these guys get my vote as some of the toughest birds on the planet. All right, one of the things, if you've been to a few of the annual meetings, you know that this is about the 5th one of these I've done on a family of birds. And one of the things I discovered after a couple of years is that every bird has some mythology, or at least some folk tales about it. So I started adding a slide to talk about this. And this one is great. How the wren became the king of birds. Apparently all the birds in Northern Europe were sitting around drinking a beer in a pub one night, and they had an argument about who was the king of the birds and how were they going to decide. So they finally decided that the bird that could fly the highest was going to be the king of the birds. So everybody goes out, sobers up, I assume, and the next morning they take off, and the eagle gets higher than anybody else, except for the wren, who's been tucked in between his wings. And when the eagle starts to falter, the wren jumps out, flies up, and flies higher than the eagle does. And when they all get back down to earth, the wren says, "I'm the king of the birds." And all the little birds are excited and all the big birds are ticked off. And I'm not sure if the big birds eat the little birds at the end of the myth or not, but that's the story. A little closer to human beings, in days of druids, the chief druid and his apprentice at the first of the year would go out searching for wisdom. And if they heard or saw a wren, they took it as a good sign that they would learn new and different things during that year about nature and about man's relationship to nature. Because if you could find something that's small and elusive, that meant that you were paying attention to what was going on around you. after the days of the Druids, we have Wrenning Day, which is on St. Stephen's Day, the 26th of December, also known as Boxing Day. And the local custom in some British villages, the local custom is to kill a wren and parade it around in as a memory of St. Stephen, who was apparently given away by the song of a wren to the local Danes when he was hiding and went on to martyrdom. In other parts of England, they catch one alive and put it in a cage and take it around asking for alms, because somewhere along the line, a bunch of English and Manx soldiers were saved from the Danes by a wren who alerted them that the Danes were coming. So you've got this. And then in Ireland, there's a similar legend that Brian Boru was given a heads up that the Danes were coming by a wren. So they celebrate Wrenning Day in Ireland. And that custom carries over to Newfoundland to this day. And there are actually hymns to wrens that are sung apparently in some of these old villages. So wrens, battery is running low on me, close, go away. All right, so wrens have their place in myth, just like everything else. All right, things that look like wrens but ain't. Basically, as the European explorers traveled the world, any small ground dwelling bird with a short and or erect tail was called a wren, even though all of these guys are not related. In the upper corner, the New Zealand wrens are one of the oldest lineages of perching birds. They're probably a sister clade to virtually everybody else in the Passeriforms. So they've been around for a long time. And for about the last 50 million years, they've been evolving away on New Zealand, so far away from everybody that no one could get there. The wren thrush. Where'd he go? Yeah, top center. The wren thrush is a single species native to the mountain spines of Central America above 4,000 feet. They live only in the mountains. And they raise that yellow crest when they're agitated, just like a ruby-crowned kinglet does. They're closely related to the Paralidae, which is the New World warblers. And oddly enough, to the Icteridae, which is blackbirds, orioles, cowbirds, and meadowlarks. All right, the next group is the Timalidae, the wren babblers. These are natives of southern and southeastern Asia and northern Australia. They're collectively known as tree babblers, and it's the same thing. They're a small insectivorous bird with a short, stiff, sometimes erect tail. And the next group is the fairy wrens of Australia down here in the corner. They're kind of neat. Fairy wrens are these little colored jewels that live in the forests in northern and the edge of Australia, wherever there's a tropical forest, you'll find fairy wrens. But they're neat little birds. One cool thing about fairy wrens is that they have very elaborate courting rituals where the male will carry around a flower petal or a piece of fruit with them when they're wooing the females. Wren warblers, the bottom center, is a family of Southern European and Northern Africa and Southern Asia and Indo-Pacific. They are distantly related to Old World warblers, which is the sylvids. That's a whole different group of critters. And again, they live in a wide variety of habitats, anywhere where there's fresh water and small insects to eat. And last but not least is the wren tit. This is the only representative of the Old World warblers that lives in North America. They're limited to the West Coast, basically from the Columbia River to northern Baja California, and then inland to the Sierra Nevadas and the Cascades. So they really live in just this narrow strip in California. And they're specialists in coastal scrub and chaparral. So those are the pretenders to the name. Okay, now let's see if I can. Gotta move that. Now I'm gonna get that to run. There we go. It's loud, but just watch. Lots of singing. If you watch the male, you see how he's shivering its wings like that? That's typical courtship behavior amongst members of the Wren family. And then she goes in and checks out the birdhouse and decides whether or not she likes it, while he continues to sing up on top. All right, that's enough of that. That's a lot of noise. In any case, that's pretty much courtship behavior for all members of the Wren family. The males do a lot of singing, the wing quivering. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but it's always part of the routine. The female will check out whatever the male has made. Males make the nests, and in their territory, they may make 4, 5, 6 nests. And then the female will come and check them all out, decide which one she likes. And then if she likes the nest and she likes the performance, she may just cozy up right away, or she may look at him and go, "Chase me, sucker." And it's all about proving your fitness, you know.
Right.
It's the typical female thing. Prove to me that you're worthy. That goes beyond there to other orders of animals. Let's put it that way. Okay, and that's essentially the way it works for just about all of them. There are some variations. Cactus wrens do more of a dance, but this is a typical house wren, which is the wing shiver is the big deal. The wing wavering is the big deal. All right, moving on to home sweet home. The nest site can be almost any kind of a cavity, including natural hollows in trees, stumps, cactus, old woodpecker holes, crevices in buildings, nest boxes, almost any kind of enclosed space, flower pots, parked cars, shoes, drain pipes, etc. When we lived in Houston, I had a big deck on the back of the house, and I was in my master gardener phase. I had a whole bunch of hanging pots on the deck, and I was out one evening watering my hanging pots, and I disturbed a Carolina wren who was roosting in one of my pots, and he flew into my eye. It was exciting. My daughter at that point, a slight humble brag, my daughter is now a professor of nursing at TCU. But she was home, and I came in the house doing this, and she's like, "Oh, let me see your eye." And she looked at it and said, "This is cool. I've got to call mom," because my wife is also a nurse, and she was at Hobby Airport with my youngest daughter for a dance competition. And the general message was, "Why are you calling me? I can't do anything about it for you." And Caitlin says, "It looks really cool, Mom. It's swollen, it's red." And it's like, "Is he bleeding?" "No." "Okay, just put an ice pack on it. It's gonna be fine." So I looked like something out of Buffy the Vampire Slayer for about 3 weeks. But that is my personal excitement with wrens nesting. They do make it what's called a cup nest, which is basically a built from whatever's around nest that's shaped like a cup. But they'll normally build a roof over it so that it's enclosed, like the one you can see in the barbecue in the corner, and the one you can see here in the cactus. It oftentimes has like a little vestibule that's kind of a landing spot for mom or dad to sit outside the nest, throw the food in, and then go get more. The one on the top is a marsh wren, and you can see the same basic structure. A marsh wren male. First of all, they show the cattails with the red-winged blackbirds, but they'll have as many as 8 or 9 nests, and they can have almost that many mates, and the males just circulate back and forth between them. And then you've got the one down here in the center that's up on top of a cabinet. And all of the eggs are variations on a theme. There's lots of speckling at the round end that gets narrow, that gets less and less as you move to the pointed end of the egg. And then it's just a question of what's the background color and what the color of the speckles are, depending on the species. So nests can be made from, where's the list? The bark strips, dried grass, dead leaves, oak catkins, sticks, pine needles, mosses, hair, feathers, light straw, wool clumps, shed snakeskin, paper, plastic, and or string. And now imagine the graduate student who had to pick apart wren nests to get that list put together so that it could make it into birds of the world for me to copy. All right. Generally speaking, they'll do in this part of the world, they'll have 2 and possibly 3 fletches a summer. Each one will have a brand new nest. They don't reuse the nest. They'll move on. They'll move on to one of the other nests in the territory, or dad will go out and build another nest, depending on the situation. Here. Only about 30% of fledglings make it through their first winter, which is not that unusual for small birds. That's about right. And only about 30% of adults live beyond their second breeding season. The oldest known house wren, or not house wren, not Carolina, the oldest known house wren was nine and something years old in the wild. That's the oldest record that we have. All right, these are North America's wrens. 10 perky butts with big voices. We will look at each one of these. Of the 10, 9 spend at least part of the year in Texas. So we'll start with the out-of-towner, then move to the year-round species from east to west. All right, this is our out-of-town wren. This is the Pacific wren. Remember, this is the one that was considered conspecific with winter wrens until recently, and with the Eurasian wren. They are tiny little birds, 4 inches maybe, and they have an amazing song. There's 36 notes per second. Let's see if I can get this to play. Oh, not going to work, unfortunately. Let's see, it's up there. Nope. All right, we're going to cheat.
You need the lights.
No, I have the font of all wisdom in my pocket. When all else fails, you use the bird app you have on your phone to play songs.
You need some water, Scott.
I've got some iced tea down here. I'll pick it up in a second. Now, this, turn it all the way up. This is the song. Come on, start. And that's roughly 36 notes per second. It's so fast that our ears cannot hear the individual notes. In a perfect world, I have this set up as a sonogram and I play it at full speed and then at half speed. And even at half speed, it still sounds like it is a bird singing because it's so fast. That's a typical nest. It's kind of pendulous and they tend to build them hanging from within a tree for the most part. But it's the same thing. It's a basic cup nest with a roof on it. As far as identifying these guys, and they are in town, we saw them up at Clear Creek in Denton on Saturday morning. They have not much of a supercilium and a very dark eye stripe behind. And they are just generally a little dark brown bird. Like I said, they're tiny. A big one is 4.5 inches long. And if you get a close enough look, they have these little dots on the side of the wing that are pretty much unique to them.
Why are they in Texas?
Why are they in Texas? Because they come here because in the summertime they're in the boreal forest. The insect life in the boreal forest is pretty well shut down. So they migrate down here to find food and to get away from the cold. Mostly migration is about finding food to eat, because if you think about it, chickadees, multiple species of chickadees, kinglets, who else? Even gnatcatchers. Some of them stay all winter long in the north, and they manage to survive somehow. They actually eat larvae that have the eggs that have been laid all over the branches and in the notches and so forth in the trees. That's their source of food. So, but there's only so much. So anybody who feels hungry, they head south because they know they can find more food. but the most dangerous thing a bird can do is migrate. Even without tall buildings that they can run into, migration is still the most dangerous 3 or 4 weeks of the year that any bird spends. Okay, the Carolina wren, this is one of ours. They live here, obviously, year round, like in my backyard. This is usually the first bird I put down for feeder watch every week. It's like, okay, there's a wren. How to tell these guys from every other wren? They are cinnamon underneath, and they have a big, bold supercilium. It's very, very prominent. You see a wren-looking bird with a big white stripe and a cinnamon underside. That's Carolina wren. They have an incredible repertoire of songs, not real different from one to the other in terms of the structure of the song, but there's lots of variation within the framework of the song, which is the same for Bewick's wren. All right, let me see if I can get this to play. Okay, that's gonna work. Come on, do it again. That's a pretty much typical Carolina wren. You should hear that in the morning. They're amongst the first to wake up and tell you it's time to get out of bed. Okay, this is a duet. Male, female. The males sing, the females do not sing, but they do call. And that scolding call is the female responding to the male. Yeah. Oh, that's oh. I didn't even come up with that. Okay, that's 7,239,534 down there in the corner. That's the number of times in 2021 that someone recorded a Carolina wren in eBird. And you think that's big? Crows, 21 million. I love eBird. I'm sorry, Sam, I'm not a great fan of iNaturalist because they don't always tell me the truth, but I love eBird. And if you haven't put Merlin on your phone and you're a bird person, put Merlin on your phone. All right, here are different scolding calls. I hope. There we go. Yeah, that one should sound familiar. I'm really pissed at the cat. Okay, so those are just some examples of scolding calls from a Carolina wren. Next is our other one, the Bewick's wren. Bewick's, like the car. I have yet to figure out how to get that. It's so me in the commercial, you know, it's so you. I can't figure out how to get that joke in here. I wish I could. But that's what everybody says. How do you pronounce it? Buick, like the car. Named by John James Audubon for his friend, Sir Thomas Bewick, who was the author of the Birds of the British Isles in 1790 something or other. The difference between this fellow and our friend is the gray underside. Still has the gigantic supercilium, nice eye stripe, grayish cheek, perky back, just like always. But if it's gray underside, if it's a gray underside, and they are slightly smaller, depending on how much you had to eat at one time or another. An interesting thing about these two birds in particular, Bewick's wrens used to be what were they used to call them the backyard wren of the Appalachians. You rarely, if ever, find them east of the Mississippi anymore. In the last 150 years, they have migrated out of that territory and pretty much taken over the western US, which is not occupied by Carolina wrens. No one can go back in time and figure out exactly what happened. But current thinking on the subject, current current theory is that the Carolina Wrens are just better adapted to the client, to the climate, maybe as things are changing, maybe not, because it's been over the last 100 years that this change has taken place. But Buick's Wrens have pretty much taken over the Western US, and Carolina Wrens pretty much taken over the Eastern US. And there's a definite split. I love this nest. It's in a tin can. I saw that picture and said, I've got to put that in there. All right. Anything else interesting? Okay, here's they don't make bird guides the way they used to. This is a direct quote from the Ornithology of Illinois in 1889. No bird more deserves the protection of man than Buick's wren. He does not need man's encouragement, for he comes into his own accord and installs himself as a member of the community wherever it suits his taste. He is found about the cowshed, the barn, along with the peewee and the barn swallow. He investigates the pigsty, then explores the garden fence, and finally mounts the roof and pours forth one of the sweetest songs that have ever been heard. That is from an actual birding guide. Does that sound like Sibley or Peterson's to you? No, it's different. Okay. They also have regional variations in their songs. Start with Oklahoma. Come on, do it again. Okay. This one's Arizona. And this one's California. Oh, I got overlap, sorry. But you can see they're different, but they follow the same pattern. There's a few notes, then there's sort of a buzzy cascade in the center, and then one or two notes at the end. And that's the pattern that it follows. Male Bewick's wren, once he's first year and he's still figuring life out, will listen to all the male wrens around in his first spring and make his own song based on what he hears from the surrounding songs. So each male has some variation on that theme that becomes his particular song. And hopefully the ladies like it, because that's what they're listening for to come find him. That's a skull call. It's a little deeper and sharper than the Carolina wren. The Carolina wren, if you remember back to the last slide, they all sort of slurred together. These guys are very little machine guns. And again, I'm really pissed at the cat call. Let me do it for time. Oh, it's almost 8 o'clock. We're going to be here for a while. I hope no one minds, especially my wife. All right, this is, where are we? The cactus wren. This is the giant of the wren family, 8 inches long. Lives anywhere where there are cactus. Basically a desert dweller, as you can see from the map on the side. They're true xerophiles. They get all their moisture from their food. They do not ever need to drink water. And again, this is the picture of the same nest built into a cactus. But these guys are, first of all, they're really big, so they're hard to miss. And believe me, they are really big. I have seen them. It's like, what is that gigantic bird sitting on that cactus? And it's like, oh, it's a wren. The supercilium, blackish speckled chest, upper chest and chin, and then this tail, long tail, full of black and white stripes. Try as hard as I could not find a picture of a cactus wren with his tail up, but I have seen it in real life. Anecdotally, I can tell you that that is what happens. And I just lost this computer. All right. Yeah, loud. And a scolding call. Oop. Oop. Okay, we're not going to get a scolding call out of the deal. All right. The next one is the canyon wren, another one that lives in drier environments, and their habitats are pretty much entirely in rock formations, any kind of a cliff or hillside that has rocks, that has holes in it. Canyon wrens live there, except for the one that lives at Lake Louisville. For the second year in a row, there's no, it's a rock wren, not canyon wren. Sorry, we'll get to him in a second. The difference here, no supercilium at all, and a gray head, and just a screaming white chest, upper chest and throat. They're, when you see one, they're pretty distinctive. They are always very active. So if you get to this kind of country and you see this, look for canyon wrens. Wrens, not that I approve of this, but if you play a recording, they will answer. Please don't do it during the breeding season, because that raises corticosteroid levels, pulls people away from feeding their kids, protecting their nest, et cetera, et cetera. But in the off season, go ahead and play a recording. You'll get somebody to come out and visit. That dropping song, that's it. Even the scolding call kind of drops off. Oh, now we're over each other. It's better when I can see the little thing moving across the bottom. All right. Moving on, rock wrens. This is the one that for the last 2 years has been living at Lake Louisville, even though they're not supposed to be here at all. And he's very accommodating. On sunny days, he'll come out of the riprap by the dam and sit there and go, "Hello, I'm a rock wren." You'll notice here the supercilium goes from the lores right behind the bill all the way over the hide and down the neck. It's a big crescent shape. So that's the thing you look for, along with just speckled white all the way down front. They're fairly easy to identify from a Carolina or a Buick's or even a house wren. And down here, you see these rocks set there. That's not random. The pair has set that out in front of their nest as sort of a landing pad and walkway up into the nest. They all have some variation on this out in front of the actual nest. A little more variation in call or song. Okay, and the scolding call. Yeah. You won't miss that one. Okay, moving on to the house wren. This is what a lot of people think of when they think of a wren. And there's the number of eBird reports in 2021, 4 million. So not as many as a Carolina wren. But this is the wren I grew up with, because I'm from the Chicago area, and that's what I thought all wrens look like. No supercilium at all. Grayish throat, and just a uniform sort of light beige with lots and lots of little ticks and marks, stripes along the backside and up the tail. When they're here in the winter, this is how you tell them apart. No super. If you see a perky butt bird with no supercilium, it's a house wren. No questions asked, because Carolina wren and a Buick's wren both have that nice bright supercilium that shows up. So that's how you can tell them apart. In terms of their lifestyle, it's pretty much the same as every other wren. They're same size, 5 to 5.5 inches as an adult. So it's typical wren size. But for our purposes of ID, the difference is the fact that there's no supercilium there. And this is a nest sitting up behind a security light on somebody's patio. This is what I remember from growing up, is that you would find wren nests everywhere. And I grew up in the typical quote mid-century modern house with the low slung roof and the big beams and all of that. And they were all over the place. My mother was a life member of Audubon. She left them there. The neighbors were like, Kathy, it doesn't look good. Kathy is like tough. It's another multi-part with the cascade in the center, much like a Buick's run. And a real fast staccato soul call. Winter wren. This is our one winter visitor. Now, as I said, they're in town right now because we had two of them calling to each other at Clear Creek on Saturday morning. The supercilium is brightest from the eye back. You can see it up here, but it's brightest from the eye back as opposed to the Carolina and Buicks, which start there and go all the way along. And they're much smaller. If you can see them next to each other, a winter wren is noticeably smaller than a Carolina or even a Bewick's wren. They're tiny. 4 inches is a big one. And they're also much darker. I have one that lives, I have a creek behind the house, and the people across on the other bank of the creek, there's a huge oak tree that has a bunch of roots that are exposed. And I have one every winter that hides out underneath those roots. So I've got all 3 of my wrens in the neighborhood. Okay, there's that song again. Talk some more, or are you done? Okay, and like I said, that's 36 notes per second if you slow it down. And that's what they call it. Another fast staccato burst. All right, you're done. Go away. All right. This is another one of our winter visitors, the sedge wren. This is another tiny little wren. The difference here is that these guys live in open prairie and they find wet spots, hence the name sedge. They like to hang out in the sedges. Now, and this is another dark bird. The difference between the winter wren and the sedge wren, they're about the same size, but you have the very dark cap and the bright white throat. And there's a difference in habitat. The winter wrens hang out in the woods. The sedge wrens hang out on the prairie. They're open country birds, as opposed to the winter wren, which is definitely a forest bird. These guys are so small and so fast that we do a site fidelity study for sparrows every winter to see who's come back from previous years. These guys will fly through the mist net. They'll hit it and just keep on going through one of the holes. They're so small. All right. And it's about that loud. When they're calling on a sunny morning and we're out there working, you can hear them for probably 300-400 yards away. And a pretty typical shoulder call. Okay. And this is the cousin, the marsh wren. For a long time, the sedge wren was called the western marsh wren, and the current marsh wren was called the eastern marsh wren. And then they decided they had to get something to separate them out. And it's basically habitat. Marsh wrens hang out in the cattails. Sedge wrens hang out in the low and medium-sized grasses in wet spots out in open area. These guys are pretty much cattail specialists. Even in the wintertime, you'll find them in cattails, bulrushes, anything big and tall right next to a body of water. In a sedge wren, you'll find in open country where you have just low damp spots, very potholes. Very similar in appearance, though. Same supercilium, although the difference here is that you've got a brown crown stripe with a black edge stripe on either side. So you've got kind of a three-color thing going there. And these black and white stripes below the nape on the shoulders. That's the real diagnostic thing with a marsh wren. You get a good look at that and you know that it's a marsh wren because that happens on no other wren species. All right, try a song. Yep, that's typical. It's not the clearest recording, I apologize. I don't know if it's them or me. But that's way more mechanical. It's actually almost melodic, the way it sounds when it's actually a bird. And if you look at the range map, it says we're in the migratory territory. They need to update that. These guys are here all winter long. All right, the crypto wrens. Let's talk about our three friends here. The winter wren, the Pacific wren, and the Eurasian wren. Sadly, I do not have my notes, but you can see the characteristic morphology. And those are just random pictures I pulled out of Cornell's website. How similar they look to one another. Same size, same supercilium, the whole thing. So you can understand why originally they were seen as a single species. From the standpoint of a morphological species, they are one. They're identical from one to the other. But they do not interbreed. In the one place where winter wrens and Pacific wrens cross over during the breeding season, which is British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Alberta, that part of the world, they do not interbreed with each other, and it's based primarily on song. The winter wren song is so much different than the Pacific wren song. Okay, yeah, is this going to work? No, it's not going to work. Rats. I have recordings of all three songs that I will play for you at some point in the future when I come back, so that we can actually compare them. All right, I always give credit where it is due. Virtually everything in here that was a graphic came from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. They don't care. I wrote them a nice letter and they said, "Are you getting paid?" And I said, "No, I do this for free." They said, "We don't care." I think if I said I was getting paid, they'd want to cut.
Right.
But in any case, I use a lot of their stuff. I also send them a 4-figure check every year to thank as a thank you. And lastly, happy birding, everybody. Okay.
Wow.
Any questions from the crowd?
I've got a question about.
Yes.
Go ahead. Oh, yeah, I've got a question about the nest. So you said that, I don't know if one or all wrens don't use the nest, they make a new nest even if it's the same season. Is there a difference in between other birds that's noticed with wren? Why would they do that, or is
Remember that it's a simple cup nest made of whatever they can find, but it always has a roof. That's the difference. Most of I can't think of another bird that I think of as a cavity nester, and wrens are cavity nesters, that doesn't find themselves a hole in a tree or a crotch between branches or something and make a nest in there. These guys will build a roof over their nest. Another great story. Anybody who was at the annual meeting, did you go to the Kleb Woods field trip? Nope. Okay. Kleb Woods is a place I used to volunteer when I lived in Houston. It's an old abandoned farm. The nature center has a drinking fountain out by the front door. Every spring, a Carolina wren will build a house on that drinking fountain, just stacked up twigs, but it's always a house with a roof. And I think that's the reason that they wouldn't use another bird's old nest, for instance. And And even if they rebuild, they probably won't even use old, according to the Cornell, they don't even use old materials from an old nest. They'll just start from scratch and build a new one every time. So it's a type A thing, I guess. Yes, Andy.
So that kind of segues to my question. So if we have a wren nest that they've used in the past.
Yeah,
And it's winter time, they're not breeding right now.
right.
Should you
Clean it out.
Clean it out?
Clean it out because they're not going to come back to it. That is not to say that some enterprising chickadee will not use it,
Sure, yeah.
but the wrens aren't coming back. Because I've got 2 or 3 wren houses in the backyard that are just basically just a ball with a hole in it that I hang from the tree limbs. And I have to clean them out every fall because they will not come back if I don't. Anything else?
We have a question from online.
Yes, ma'am.
From Grace Darling. What are the theories to account for the exuberant speciation of wrens in North America?
There really isn't one other than that they originated here. So this is the place where they started. So they had 2 whole continents to mess with. And they just took over every space they could. Like I said, a wren habitat is one that has abundant small insects. They don't care about anything else. They breed in tropical rainforests, they breed on the Tibetan Plateau, they breed in the Rockies, they breed in Alaska, and they breed all the way to the tip of South America. Any place they can find small insects to eat, that's home.
I have a question. So is the scoring call only from the female?
No, the male will also do a scolding call. It's just that, at least in temperate regions, by and large, female birds do not sing. That's not entirely true. A female cardinal has a song, but her song has a single purpose. Dad, bring food. Dad, bring food. Dad, bring food. That's what she's singing for. And it's, dude, these are half of your genetics. Get some food in here. And the reason for that, I have 3 daughters. 2 of them are PhDs. And little humble brag again. Thank you, thank you. Their older sister runs a preschool. She has a master's in special ed. The reason I think is because ornithology, like most of the physical sciences, was a male occupation until about the last 20 years. And at this point, my daughter's a researcher and biology instructor. She teaches something weird with genetics that I don't understand at UNT. More than half of her students are women. I think that's absolutely fabulous. I want to know why it was. I went to school where there were more guys than gals in college, but I'm happy now that I have 3 daughters that is the case. But a lot of it has to do with women going into science and asking the questions. Well, why don't they sing? Are you sure they don't sing? Have you really studied this? Sure enough. They discovered female birds do sing in temperate climates. Not like in the tropics, it's very common. A lot of neotropical species, part of the bonding of a pair is singing this duet that's so perfectly timed and tuned that you can't tell it's 2 birds, but it's 2 birds singing a duet together. And that's part of their bonding ritual. So it was long thought in temperate climates that female birds never sing, but yes, they do.
Well, how effective is the scolding call?
It's not to chase something away. It's to let everybody else in the neighborhood know there's something to watch out for.
Oh, okay.
It's much like if you've ever read about chickadee calls, the number of DDDs at the end of the call is a signal to other birds and in fact to other species that there's something you'd better pay attention to out here. And the number of Ds at the end kind of signifies whether it's on the ground or in the air or in the trees or perched or flying. It's fascinating. I did a similar talk to this one on chickadees a couple of years ago. And I spent most of the time talking about chickadee communication. The chickadees themselves are also similar looking, that it's like you look at one, you've seen the other ones. But their communication system is amazing. Squirrels, other small mammals, smart cats have figured out that if they hear a chickadee call dee 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 dee, that means you better look around because there's something going on. And the cat is like, amazing, you know? And that there's actually a paper looking at small avian predators like cats. Please leave your cat indoors at night. In my neighborhood, you leave the cat indoors because if you leave it outside, it becomes bobcat food. But in other places, they're the hell out of songbirds. But anyway, someone did a study looking at small predators, and however they figured it out, probably by playing recorded calls, they got to the point they discovered that for an outdoor cat, they hear the right chickadee sound, they start looking around. It's like, damn, then they. And so we're just beginning to scratch the surface of avian communication. If you look at a bird's brain, first of all, it's built completely differently than a human brain. It's layered rather than bunched up. But the part of their brain that controls songs and calls is huge. And they can't have that just for fun. That's not just to attract a mate. It does something else too. And we're finding out now that birds communicate interspecies, between intra and interspecies, and even intra-order, because like I said, squirrels and other small mammals will pay attention to chickadee calls. They'll pay attention to scolding calls from wrens and look around and go, okay, something I got to worry about here. So it's neat stuff. I have a whole separate talk on that if you'd like me to come back. Okay. It's 8:15. My hall pass runs out in 35 minutes. I'm supposed to be home before 9 o'clock. Thank you all very much for being a great audience. I appreciate it. I always enjoy talking to the troops. Hi, Suzanne. Nice to know you're out there in the real world, the virtual world. If there aren't any more questions, I'm going to finish my iced tea. And
When and where does the Elm Fork chapter meet?
the Elm Fork chapter meets in the new governmental palace in Denton County. It's on Loop 288. And it's quite an imposing courthouse. It's got the big dome and the whole business. And because roughly 65 or 70% of our members do not like to drive after dark, we meet in the mornings on the third Thursday.
Third Thursday.
Third Thursday of the month. So our Christmas party is December 15th, I think, at which we throw quite a spread. The chapter actually parts with some money to buy the meats, and then the members bring all the side dishes, which is probably about what you guys do here. And really, we do all of our training during the day too. It does skew our chapter to the retired folks, but that has been the tradition for the last 12 or 14 years. That the general consensus was, this is our audience. What can we do to appeal to our audience? And it's meet during the day.
Yeah.
So that's what we do.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome very much.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
I think we'll have our drawings now, and those of you make sure, those of you who are here, please sign in if you haven't done so. We have a few t-shirts left. Mary Beth, perhaps you could read the names, maybe those folks that are on Zoom. You have, okay, never mind. Carol has emailed them, and there's some hats and so forth. So thank you all, but I am going to start reading some numbers of the tickets, and thank you on Zoom, and you'll be hearing from us about the party.